Just as you need an advertising strategy and a budget to fund it, it is essential in a competitive race to have what we commonly call a free press strategy. Free press is just that, ink and attention you don't have to pay for, ink and attention that you earn. Too often I see candidates who regard the news media as a nuisance to be endured, or in some cases a hostile force to be avoided or treated as an enemy. So at the outset, let me say that approach will not get you anywhere and will bring to you and your campaign nothing but grief. For if you treat the press as the enemy, the press will treat you and your campaign as the enemy. And no matter how much you have to spend, it is hard to outshout those who buy their ink by the barrel or who have unfettered access to the airwaves. Why do you need an earned media strategy? The press has a job to do. They're going to do their job whether you like it or not. If you take a passive, hands-off approach to the media, you will be doing yourself and your campaign a disservice. For voters do pay attention, and they are influenced by the things other than your paid political advertising. Furthermore, the press will not react well if you avoid them. In fact, they will assume that you have something to hide, or that you are afraid of difficult questions, or that you can't answer questions or defend your positions. If they come to that conclusion, they will make your life very difficult. Finally, if you have no earned media strategy, you'll be squandering a cheap and inexpensive means of disseminating your message to the public. The first step in constructing a free press strategy is to inventory every media outlet in your district, every daily and weekly newspaper, magazine, blog, radio station, cable, and commercial television station. Next, take a look at the media outlets outside your district that are widely read, heard, or viewed by a substantial number of your would-be constituents. Get the names of the reporters, their contact information, email address, and the names of the bookers and producers for the TV and radio hosts. Be sure to also include any important columnists or guest commentators that often show up on the editorial pages of newspapers or important publications. You now have a press list. Those who should receive your press releases, news about your campaign, copies of your speeches, or op-eds that you write during the course of your campaign. The second step in constructing a free press strategy is to put together a press packet, some flattering pictures of yourself, a complete biography that is accurate, where you live, what you do, where you went to school, what you've done with your life, important awards that you have received, the charitable or benevolent organizations that you've been involved with, plus a synopsis of your platform, your rationale for running, and what you hope to accomplish if elected. Step 3, inventory your press list and decide who the most important reporters are, starting with the print reporters. Then do some homework. I always tell my clients that before they talk to a reporter, they should know the reporters they are talking to. And by that I mean this, not just their name, but everything you can learn about the person, where they were raised, where they went to school, where they earned their degrees, their hobbies, and special interest. Inventory the stories they have written and look at their writing style. Are they the kind of reporter who digs and does real investigative journalism? Or are they satisfied to quote from press releases they are fed or the blogs they read? When a campaign issues a press release, are they the kind of reporter who always offers the opponent a chance to comment? Other than the people they are writing about, who are those they call frequently to comment on campaigns they are covering? They will be those who are often quoted in their stories. In our business, we call them quote sluts. Those who are always ready and willing to offer commentary on a candidate's strategy, their tactics, or the state of somebody's campaign. Why should you care who they quote? Because sometimes you can influence the story that a reporter writes by feeding information to those they frequently quote. In college journalism, students learn there is no such thing as an objective reporter. Indeed, objective journalism is an oxymoron. Reporters are human, And just like you, they have minds that think and opinions on issues of our time. Inevitably, their biases will make their way into the stories they write, the questions they ask of candidates, and the way they cover them. You may not be able to do much about that, but at least you will know their biases before you sit down for a conversation. Finally, talk to a few of the candidates they've covered. Did those candidates feel they were treated fairly? Did the journalists play gotcha games? Were they quoted accurately? If not, you should take steps to ensure that you are, by having a tape recorder handy or by answering questions in writing. I usually suggest to candidates that they have a sit-down with reporters, particularly print reporters, before they make their formal announcement. It is a chance to get to know them if you don't already, a chance to take a measure of them and give them a chance to take a measure of you. On your own terms, it is your chance to tell them who you are, what makes you tick, events that have affected your views and outlook, what moves you, why you think the way you do. It gives you a chance to humanize yourself. In most cases, I find that reporters have a more difficult time assassinating the character of a candidate they know as opposed to one they don't. It also increases the likelihood that you'll get the benefit of the doubt, or at least a phone call if your opponent drops some nasty information about you into the lap of the reporter. This pre-announcement conversation I am recommending is not a time to dump on your opponent. It's about what is right about you and why you believe in what you are trying to do. Some rules to live by. Never, ever, ever lie to a reporter. If you do, they will never trust you again, and they will assume that if you lie to them, you'll lie to everyone else, including the voters, and that you lack the integrity to hold public office. The pre-announcement conversation is also a good opportunity to preempt anything in your background that could present a problem during your campaign. Put your problem out on your own terms in advance of your announcement, because if you don't, your opponent will. And if it is news to the reporter, I can guarantee you that it will be a story. Some examples. I once had a client who had been a contractor. During a difficult year in his career, he'd been forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The circumstances were this. He was building an expensive home. The person he was building it for kept promising to get current on the payments, but fell 6 months behind. Rather than lay off his workers and walk away from a job half done, the contractor continued doing the work and paying his employees until he got the house into a weather-ready condition. That decision forced him to declare bankruptcy until he was able to sue his client and force the client to pay. The reporter, having been given a full briefing on the circumstances of the story, did not mention the bankruptcy when my client made a formal announcement. Even more important, when my client's opponent tried to make it an issue in the campaign, the reporter helped tell the voters our side of the story and did such a good job doing it that the bankruptcy never became an issue that caused a problem. Example 2. I once had a client who'd gone through a messy divorce in his first marriage. He freely admitted to me that it was mostly his fault. He was young, immature, not ready for marriage, and he'd cheated on his spouse. In his pre-announcement interview, I made sure that he gave the reporter a copy of the divorce papers, and I had him candidly explain why the marriage had failed, what he'd learned from the experience, and how, as a result of learning from those mistakes, he'd had a successful second marriage and had raised 3 young children. When his opponent later sent a copy of the divorce papers with a suggestion that the reporter do a little digging, the reporter responded that he was already familiar with the story and that he regarded it old news. Example 3. In one of the early meetings I had with a new client, he told me he was running for office because he wanted to crack down on drug abuse, impose harsh sentences on those who sold illegal drugs, and force drug dealers, including first-time offenders, into a very strict rehabilitation program that included boot camps and physical labor. I also learned that his son had been in and out of drug rehab most of his teenage years. Rather than keep the press in the dark about his son's drug problem, I had him explain it up front and tell the reporters that his son was the reason for his tough position on drug dealers and drug abuse. As he said, "I don't want any parent to have to endure what I have. And having been through it, I now believe the only way to fix it is to get tough on both the dealers and the buyers." The press thereafter used his spin in every story they wrote, and they never treated his son's problem as some new revelation or new news. Example 4. I once had a client who wanted to be a judge. He confided to me that 20 years before, he'd been the cause of a fatal accident after attending a weekend cocktail party. Yes, he said, he'd driven home drunk and the accident was his fault. He'd paid his debt to society, given restitution to the family of the victim, and had given annual lectures to area high school convocations on the dangers of drinking and driving. Furthermore, he had had not a drink since. When his opponent tried to use it in the campaign, the press included in the story every detail that my client had provided them, and spun the story in a way that made it look like a youthful mistake for which my client had taken full responsibility. Telling the press about your problems up front does not ensure they will never be raised in the campaign or that reporters will never write a story about them. But it will improve your chances of having your side of the story in the article. Put your problem out on your terms and get it over with. You'll be treated better than if you try and hide it. And if you are really lucky, the press will decide that your past problem is not a story at all. I can also make this guarantee. If you don't mention and explain up front something that could be potentially fatal to your campaign, chances are it will be fatal. Once you have made the rounds with key reporters in your district and done the obligatory pre-announcement interview, it is then time to make your formal announcement. Some do's and don'ts. Make it easy for the reporters to do their job. Give them a hard copy of your speech and also one on disc. Have a crowd. Do some sound bites for distribution to any radio or TV station that can't come to your announcement. Practice your speech so that you can deliver it well and fluently. Make sure you put some meat into it about why you want the job. This is not a day for Q&A. Give your speech and get off the podium, for otherwise you may find that the story is not the substance of your speech, but an ill-thought answer to a question you were not expecting. In other words, announcement day is not a day to step on your own message. Once your campaign is off the ground and you have formally entered the race, it is imperative that you stay in the news. If you're not playing offense and being assertive with the press, you'll find yourself constantly on defense and you can't win a campaign that way. There are several ways to stay in the news during the course of a campaign. Endorsements from organizations or prominent political figures or business leaders or the heads of influential organizations are always useful for press releases. Invite reporters to cover your speeches that you're giving to groups in your district. If they can't cover it, send a copy of the speech to them. Issue a release every day or every other day, letting the press know where you are, what your travel schedule is, and who you are speaking to or meeting with. If you are invited or can get yourself invited to write an op-ed for a newspaper, make sure a copy is disseminated to the media and offer to give one-on-one interviews about the subject of your op-ed. News conferences, by their definition, make news. You don't want to wear out your welcome by having too many, and when you do have them, make sure the news you are making is real news, a really important endorsement, a new policy initiative. Or use a news hook, something that has happened that day or the previous day that could have been prevented had your proposed legislation been law, or how you are going to stop something from happening in the future by signing or passing a bill. A word of caution about press conferences: you will be expected to answer questions. Don't hold a press conference unless you are well prepared for questions you might be asked. Be proactive with TV and radio stations. Stay in touch with the bookers and agents and offer to do one-on-one TV and radio interviews. When you have booked them, let the rest of the press know when you will be on the air. Photo ops are another way to stay in the news. Announce that you'll be campaigning for votes in a certain neighborhood and invite reporters to take a picture of you knocking on a door or shaking hands with business merchants in a small town or neighborhood, or visiting with a farmer, or holding a town meeting or volunteering to work in a soup kitchen on Christmas Day. During the course of any campaign, there are 4 things that are usually guaranteed to make news: pictures, polls, mistakes, and attacks. Pictures. If you are doing a photo op, or if the press is around when you are campaigning, always be mindful of what the pictures would look like in a newspaper or on television. For example, if you are volunteering in a soup kitchen, you want to be serving food to the homeless, not washing dishes when the picture is taken. When the photographers are around, be mindful of what your surroundings are, who is standing with you, the way you are dressed, and where you are standing, lest you be like the presidential candidate who fell off the stage flipping pancakes, or the candidate whose photo was shot while his fly was open, or the one-time mayor of Cleveland who set his hair on fire trying to cut a ribbon with a blowtorch. As a general rule, it is never a good idea to invite reporters to take pictures while you are eating. Those kinds of pictures seldom come out well. All of this said, the pictures which usually cause the greatest pain to political candidates are those for which they don't pose for the press. Pictures from their past they may not remember, pictures taken by a bystander in an embarrassing moment, pictures snapped when the candidate thinks there are no cameras around. Remember this rule to avoid being the subject of ridicule. When you leave your house in the morning, presume that you are on camera and always be mindful of how you would look if someone snapped a photo. And don't presume that simply because you are in a private meeting with a potential contributor or interest group that someone isn't taping or taking a picture. Finally, it is always a good idea to inventory your memory at the outset of a campaign, your recollection of embarrassing pictures that might exist or surface, so that you are prepared to explain them when they do. It is also a good idea to be careful with your rhetoric so that you don't invite embarrassing photographs to surface. Some examples. In 1988, to beat down rumors of infidelity, presidential candidate Gary Hart invited reporters to follow him around, claiming they'd be very bored. They did. And it was not long before a photograph appeared of a 29-year-old woman who was not Gary Hart's wife sitting on his lap on a yacht named Monkey Business. That ended his campaign. The Attorney General of Alabama was rumored to be involved with a member of his staff. When confronted by a reporter who said the newspaper had possession of some incriminating photographs, the candidate angrily responded that since there had been no affair, there were no such pictures. The next day, the newspaper published photographs of a female staff member letting herself into his apartment late at night holding a suit bag and re-emerging the next morning wearing a different outfit. His campaign did not end well. A one-time candidate for governor of New York was seen by a reporter at a conference in the company of an attractive woman who was not his wife. When the reporter confronted the candidate, he claimed that he and his wife were separated and that his wife was aware of their relationship. The reporter promptly dispatched a photographer to that candidate's house to speak with his wife. The next day, readers of the New York Post saw a picture of his wife holding 2 suitcases, 2 kids in tow, walking out the front door of her house, pronouncing that she was sick of her husband's infidelity. End of his campaign. The point of the stories? Pictures can ruin a career. Pictures can throw your campaign off course. Pictures are news. If they don't exist, don't invite bad pictures by lying to the press. If a bad picture surfaces, You had best have a response other than no comment. If bad pictures happen to your opponent, have your friends move them into circulation on the internet, then stand back and enjoy the fun. Polls. The most common questions that candidates hear from reporters are this: how is your campaign going? How much money have you raised? What do your polls say? The answers are your campaign's going well. You will have all the money you need to ensure that voters hear your message. And regardless of whether your polls show you up or down, simply say that you are where you expected to be at this stage of the campaign. Why? While polls are always news to reporters, it is seldom wise for campaigns to get into a debate about poll numbers. Rank and file voters don't care what your polls say. They care about what you are going to do for them. And a poll that has you up today may have you down tomorrow. If confronted by a bad poll, simply say that you are confident you'll be where you want to be on Election Day and get back on message. If you have good numbers, let your contributors know that you're making progress, but resist the temptation to churn out a press release. It may come back to haunt you. Attacks. If you attack, it will be news. If you are attacked, it will be news. It is the nature of combat, and one that journalists cannot resist covering. It's their job. And it is your job to carefully plan your attacks to keep your opponent on the defensive. Inconsistencies in issue positions, mistakes in their biography, why their values are out of sync with the electorate, why their positions are wrong, why you are better than your opponent. Some general rules: do your homework and make sure it is done well. For if you say something inaccurate, it will be you that has egg on your face. Be prepared to document what you are saying. Give some thought and consideration to where and how you are going to do it. Press release, press conference, televised debate, or releasing a new TV or radio spot and announcing to the press that you're putting it on the air. Blogs are another tried and true method of getting information into circulation without it being obvious that you are behind it. Mainstream journalists read them, and often information in those blogs quickly finds its way into the mainstream media. If there is a blog that promotes your opponent, monitor it closely and be prepared to respond to what it says. Just as important, establish one of your own and use it to disseminate information about your opponent. And when you are attacked, how you respond makes a difference. The worst answer is no comment. You might as well say guilty as charged. The best response to any attack is to provide a brief answer to the charge, then launch a counterattack that undermines the credibility of your opponent, impugns their motives, makes them look like a hypocrite or a desperate candidate who has nothing positive or substantive to say. Mistakes. Mistakes are always news. If you make one, admit it and move on. Your mission is to make a mistake a one-day story and not a 3 or 4 day story. If your opponent makes one, look for ways to keep it in the news. Finally, as you deal with reporters and journalists, remember the following, for it will help you in your relationships. They too have families and spouses and a social life beyond your campaign, and they are not obligated to ignore their life to make yours easier. They don't work for you, and no matter how friendly you may be, it is not their obligation to quote your every word or print every press release or attend your every event. They too have deadlines, and if they tell you that their story needs to be filed by 5 p.m., take it seriously. A reporter's job is to sell newspapers, generate listeners and viewers, which is why pictures, polls, mistakes, and attacks are so readily covered. It's news, it's their job to report it. You will not advance your campaign by making their job more difficult or by attacking them for doing their job. While newspaper reporters operate under the pretense of objective journalism, most radio talk show hosts don't. You'll have to judge for yourself whether it is useful to be a guest on a certain radio talk or news show. If you are, some useful things to remember. Know your host, his or her style, and the topic you're going to be discussing during your interview. Be prepared and know the subject. Have your talking points in mind before you start your interview. Know what it is that you're going to say, what message you want to communicate, and practice doing it before the interview takes place. Know the format. Is it just you and the host, or will members of the audience be allowed to call in and ask questions during the show? If so, have your volunteers and staff ready to call with questions about the topics you want to discuss during the interview. During your preparations, tape the practice session and play it back to get a measure of how you sound, for your voice will convey your interest and energy, and it is essential that you sound alive and enthusiastic when you answer the questions. And don't lose your cool. It will be a story if you do, and replayed endlessly over blogs and the internet and other outlets for all to hear. In preparing for a television interview, some rules to live by. How you look is just as important as what you have to say. Dress professionally. Don't wear expensive watches or jewelry or gaudy ties. Make time for makeup. Know the format and the rules of engagement and what the host intends to discuss. And of course, know anything and everything you can learn about the topic before you go on. Study the style of the host, whether they are combative or laid back or quick with follow-up questions or satisfied to let the guest set the course of the conversation. Sit up. Never sit back in an overstuffed chair. When responding to the question, look at the host. Know how long you're going to be on before the interview, and have in mind what points you want to make during the time you have. And of course, remember that the worst possible place to ever lose your temper in a political campaign is in front of a TV camera. Voters expect reporters to dig and ask difficult questions and to be combative in the way they do it. Voters expect their candidates to be steady, calm, and composed, even in the face of adversity, even when they are under interrogation. Before we wind this up, I also want to talk about debates, particularly televised debates. They are dangerous in that they can ruin a campaign. They are also wonderful opportunities to put down an opponent and permanently alter the course of a crusade. It is for that reason they are sometimes decisive. Had it not been for John Kennedy's performance in 1960 against Richard Nixon, he would not have won. Debates proved decisive in 1980 in the race between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. In 1984, Walter Mondale was taken seriously after he bettered Ronald Reagan in their first of two debates, and ridiculed after Reagan bettered him in the second and last debate. There were decisive debate moments in 1992, 2000, and 2004 that helped determine the person who sat in the Oval Office. I've often had clients whose campaigns were on track and who were ahead in the polls tell me they were not going to debate. 99 times out of 100, I tell them they have to debate whether they want to or not. Voters expect it. The press expects it. Interest groups expect it. And the grief a candidate takes for ducking a debate or refusing to appear with an opponent is seldom worth the price. And certainly if you are running behind your opponent or underfunded, you will want as many chances as possible to trip your opponent in front of a TV camera. The best way to ensure that a debate goes the way you want it to is to first know the format, know the rules, and then prepare with the same fervor that you would a bar exam. To the extent that you can influence the format, try. If you are taller than your opponent, you will want to debate your opponent side by side at a podium. If you are shorter, you'll want to sit either at a table or with open chairs so that voters don't notice the height difference. Will there be a moderator? If so, who? Once you know, try and find footage of other debates a moderator has moderated so that you know their style and how they carry the debate. Will there be an audience? Will the audience be visible to the TV cameras during the debate or while the other candidates are talking? Will members of the audience be allowed to ask questions? If so, who will be allowed to ask what? Know the rules. Will the candidates be given the opportunity to give an opening or closing statement? If so, how long? What topics will be covered in the debate? How long will each candidate be given to answer the question? Will the candidates be allowed to rebut or respond to what the other says? Will the candidates be allowed to ask each other questions? Will candidates be allowed to bring or take notes? Where will the TV cameras be positioned? And will the television audience see how your opponent is reacting while you talk? Once you know the format and the rules, you'll have a better idea how to prepare. It is always best to prepare with the same format and rules under which you will be expected to perform. Practice by having a good friend or trusted aide assume the role of your opponent, someone who knows your opponent well and can emulate their style and manner. If you can find footage of your opponent in a prior debate, spend time studying their style and how they react under pressure. Develop a strategy. That is, decide in advance what you want to get out of the debate and the distinctions you want to draw. If this debate is the first in a series, you will want to consider ways to draw your opponent out on a topic they may not want to discuss, or force them to clarify a position they would rather not have clarified, or use the first debate to set a trap that you'll spring in a future debate. The most famous example is how Lincoln used the debates in 1858 to force Douglas to clarify his position on slavery, which enabled Lincoln to use it against him in the campaign of 1860. As you prepare, have a few sound bites in the back pocket and be ready to use them. That said, never use a sound bite simply for the sake of using one. You'll look canned if you do, and everybody will notice. As you prepare your strategy, give thought to how you can use the format and the rules to emphasize your strengths and exploit the weaknesses of your opponent. If your opponent is long on generalities and short on specifics, use your mastery of details to demonstrate the shallowness of your opposition. If your opponent has spent their campaign attacking you, but saying little else, use the debate to point out that they have not been able to articulate an agenda for improving the lives of their constituents. Are there weaknesses of your own that you will want to use the debates to address? In 1980, Ronald Reagan used his debates to show that he was not the reckless ideologue that the Carter campaign had portrayed him to be. He accomplished his task by keeping his composure, answering the questions in a measured way that made it easy for a nation to imagine Reagan sitting in the Oval Office. Anticipate your opponent's strategy, how they might try to put you on the defensive, or what they will try to emphasize during your encounter. Finally, as you practice debating your opponent, practice listening. Too many times I've seen candidates miss wonderful opportunities to level their opponent during a debate. The reason they missed it is they were concentrating on what they were going to say next instead of listening to what their opponent was saying. Oh, and by the way, if you plan to spring a surprise on your opponent during the debate, keep the surprise a surprise. Don't telegraph what your plans are by mentioning it to a reporter. And make sure the staff you have helping you prepare keep their mouths shut about what you plan to do. A few other things worth mentioning. How you look is sometimes more important than what you say, which is why it is important to meticulously prepare. You will feel and look far more confident in the debate if you have practiced and are fully prepared. Your confidence will show in the way you talk, your presence, and command. Again, make time for makeup before the debate and make sure it is done by somebody who knows what they are doing. Dress professionally and conservatively. No gaudy ties or crazy-looking patterns or colors. Never lose your temper. And think twice before you start an argument with the moderator, even if the moderator is being an ass. Usually that is a sure way to hand victory to your opponent. These are just a few of the do's and don'ts of dealing with the press. It is not easy work, it requires serious effort, in a campaign that is attentive to detail and deeply committed to an earned press program. And for that very reason, because it is labor-intensive and requires a serious effort, it is one that campaigns often ignore. Do that at your own peril. A good press program does not ensure victory, but my mouth to your ears. In a competitive race that is headed down to the wire, the one with the better press program is usually the one that wins the election. I'm Jay Townsend. Thanks for listening.